Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here with you today. And we had excellent speakers earlier. Clearly, we meet at a time when, there is persistent low growth, low global trade, weak global trade, weak investments, weakening productivity. So it doesn't seem like we're meeting at a time when, we have strong, sustainable, job-rich, global growth. And doesn't seem like a great background for, obviously, more investments. But this is exactly why I think we should be constructive about future. There's a lot that we can do, and there's been, excellent recommendations. Clearly, the world needs to avoid protectionism, which is currently limiting global trade growth. In a year like this, we should have had at least global trade rising by about 6 to 7%. That was the norm. Almost 2 times global growth. But unfortunately, as it was indicated, we're stuck at, trade growth rates of, trade volume growing at almost half of global growth, which is very unusual if you look at world history. So protectionism is one clearly trap that we should avoid. But unfortunately, there's a lot of rhetoric of that sort, and hopefully we can avoid it, but clearly that requires a strong effort. I was in Washington last week attending IMF World Bank meetings, and of course at the margins of those meetings we had G20 finance ministers meeting as well. And a few weeks ago we were in China for G20 Leaders Summit. So that was actually a very strong message to avoid protectionism. Clearly, there has been a lot of populism. There is fear of innovation and technological change leading to, obviously job destruction. I think those fears clearly need to be addressed to avoid further protectionism, further populism on a global scale. So the best way to do that, of course, for countries to address those concerns. And it's very interesting you have inclusive investments. I think inclusiveness is the really magical word. Remember when Turkey chaired the G20 presidency, our themes were 3 I's. And of course, one of those key I's was inclusiveness. It really matters because I think we need to address the parts of society that either feel or actually are affected negatively by globalization, or at least they don't have equal share. I think we need to address that. Otherwise, the backlash is probably going to rise. And if you look at today's political headlines, it suggests maybe we are in an episode or a period of this sort. So clearly, there's a lot to be done. Our view is, that to get global growth back to pre-crisis level, to get global trade pick up, to get people to believe in trade openness, the benefits of trade openness and investments, clearly we need to go back to basics, and that is, employ all policy tools. And here, structural reforms really matter. I know structural reforms have sometimes short-term costs. And usually, when you talk about reforms, there's a lot of noise about short-term costs of those reforms. But we also know that in the medium and long run, there are significant benefits of reforms. And that's why I think whether we address skill mismatch, there's no talk, no point of being afraid of technology and innovation or, trade destroying jobs. If you can actually improve your education system, if you can invest in learning, active labor market policies, clearly you're better positioned in dealing with these challenges. So I think one area where there has to be much stronger resource, resource to be channeled as well as focus would be, again, getting prepared for this age of robotics and this technological change. There is no evidence that trade is destroying jobs. There is some evidence that certain segments of society or certain geographic locations might be negatively affected. So that's when I think policymakers have a significant task of mitigating those, obviously, concerns, addressing those problems. Fiscal policy, clearly some countries have fiscal room and some countries don't. But I think it's not about dimension, it's not about the size of fiscal space. It's about reorientation. It's about prioritization. You can stay within the same fiscal framework, but actually, prioritize quality investments. And again, that's investment could be in education, could be in infrastructure, could be in R&D. But at the end of the day, I think there is resources, but even in countries where fiscal space is constrained by debt dynamics, still there is significant scope to do things much better, more effectively. Monetary policy, I think, is largely run its course. In fact, the current, some of the current, let's say, developments could be even counterproductive, like negative yields or bank profitability and other issues, pensions, etc. But clearly, again, we cannot rely on just monetary policy. So I think we have a huge task ahead of us as policymakers. It's tough out there. Populism is rising. We've seen 1,400 protectionist measures against trade. I'm talking about since the global financial crisis. This is huge. And we've seen actually at a time when there is severe need for reforms, reform, I'm speaking in general, is largely stalled on a global scale. These are at least some of the observations by OECD or other international organizations. So the task is huge, but I really think that whether or not we stay in the low growth trap or whether we move out of it will largely depend on how we respond. I think inclusiveness is the magical word here, because if the benefits of even smaller, modest growth are not shared more equally, or segments of society that seems at disadvantage by these developments, clearly it will be very difficult to restore confidence and belief in openness in trade, which has been, by the way, an engine of growth. And that's where investments come in. Again, the uncertain prospects of, let's say, demand clearly has been a barrier. So we need to have an integrated strategy. I think on one hand, as I said, structural reforms needs to be revived. Fiscal policy needs to be more investment-friendly and growth-friendly to the extent that you either reorient resources or use fiscal space. Now, there are, as I said, many things we can do to bolster confidence and therefore get out of this trap. If I may, I'd like to spend a few minutes on what Turkey is doing. I know if you look at headlines about Turkey, last few years, it's been challenging, to put it diplomatically. It's been tough because of rising geopolitical risks, domestic political noise, and with the final, obviously, episode of the July 15 coup attempt. So unless you dig beyond unless you go beyond headlines, unless you have a thorough, more detailed analysis of Turkey, you may actually be persuaded to think that Turkey is on a sort of downward trend as a story, as an investment destination. But I would argue that actually it's exactly the opposite, that the worst is behind us. That actually what has happened on July 15th actually strengthens the case for investing in Turkey, the Turkish story. What do I mean by that? Well, my first argument is that democracy and development go hand in hand. And I think Turkish democracy is stronger than ever. Yes, it survived a huge attack, because a coup is an attack on democracy, on rule of law. Had that been successful, rule of law and democracy would have been destroyed. There would have been decades of setbacks. But people stood up for their future. They risked their own lives, and they saved their future and their democracy. I think this is quite commendable. And that's why I have a stronger belief in Turkish democracy. But equally important, we have responded by reforming Turkey over the last couple of months to make sure that such an attack on democracy never ever happens again. We have enhanced dramatically the civilian oversight, civilian control of the military. And therefore, I think that reduces the risk, not only because people stood up and any future attempts against Turkish democracy would have to take people into account, but equally important, we have done institutional reforms. And that's very important. I think that was the primary reason for introducing the constitutional framework of state of emergency. State of emergency gives the government the powers to restructure state in a wholesale fashion, swiftly. And since 1859, that was the first, by the way, coup attempt back during Ottoman times, always politicians, opinion leaders, after an attack on democracy would say, never ever again, we have to reform. But this is the first time where we have done fundamental reforms. So I think this is important. So my first message is, we will continue to adhere democratic principles. We will uphold rule of law, even against those who try to destroy rule of law. That may not how it come across in headlines, but that's exactly what is happening. I wish, we had a sort of more time that I could give you some color, but rule of law will apply, and we will adhere democratic principles. And Turkish democracy has survived, and it's highly likely it will strengthen. And that's my first message. And that's why I think I am optimistic about Turkey addressing its own structural problems. And we have plenty. So that's my first message. My second message is, despite some occasional disagreements between us and our friends, as you would also see occasionally within even families, we're not going to break up with West. Turkey is not drifting away. Reconciliation, restoring relations with some of our neighbors is not necessarily an alternative to other relations. What I'm trying to say is that we have not lost our belief in actually also trade openness and further integration. And that's why this actually manifests itself in Turkey's search, a stronger search, even post-coup attempt to upgrade its customs union deal or agreement with EU. At a time when, following Brexit, of course, at a time of rising populism, rising far right, and backlash, concerns about immigration, refugees, we're actually trying to persuade EU to sign a new generation of free trade agreement that would include services, agriculture, and public procurement. Because we have a full customs union that cover manufactured goods. Because we believe in ourselves. We are competitive. And we believe we could double trade volume between EU and Turkey from about $150, $160 billion easily to $300 billion over the next decade or so. This is a low-hanging fruit. So that's why I think our relations with our sort of Western partners will continue to strengthen. There may be some occasional misunderstanding. It's not a good strategy actually to be talking about each other or even to be shouting at each other. The best strategy would be talk to each other. And that's exactly where we are now. So there was a few weeks of talking about each other or shouting at each other, but we moved beyond that. And that's my second message. We believe in trade, benefits of trade, global integration, and we will continue to pursue that path because we believe that that's the path that ultimately leads to more productivity and lasting prosperity. So that hasn't changed. My third message is, usually after such a massive shock to the system, a coup attempt is no ordinary event, even if it fails. Usually people tend to think, and actually international observers, institutions, some of them had knee-jerk reaction and quickly concluded that that would lead to a noisier, a more polarized domestic political backdrop. And they got that part wrong. Exactly the opposite has happened. The opposition to coup wasn't limited just to the ruling party supporters. It was a country united, regardless of your background, your ethnicity, your political affiliation. It was literally, the night of the coup, but also days and weeks that followed. People who were on the streets, they came from all walks of life. They were people from different types of political affiliation. So that event had led to easing of domestic political tensions. It actually eased domestic, if there was, political polarization. There's actually been a strong political consolidation or support for the government, the president, and that's reflected in many surveys. So our job is to take advantage of the current environment, which is a lot more conducive of actually accelerating structural reforms. Now, if you read headlines about Turkey, it's mostly about geopolitics or domestic political noise. You probably haven't heard that Turkey, early this year, in February this year, had actually introduced a fairly comprehensive R&D reform. Because we need to move up the global value chain. because that's the only way actually we can move from high middle income, being a high middle income country, to a high income country. And so, moving up value chain, of course, is easier said than done, but I think it requires a big push in terms of creating an ecosystem of R&D, innovation, and all other support mechanisms. And that's exactly what I'm referring to. Not many of you probably have heard that Turkey actually did a labor market reform in May this year. Yes, we did. Of course, the work is not finished, but key components of a labor market reform were actually introduced, which is usually difficult. You won't believe it, but in August, right after the sort of coup attempt, and this shows Turkey's capacity to respond in a positive way, we actually pushed a major reform to help improve investment climate. Let me just sort of quantify and give you one sort of bit of, what do I mean? I mean, by enhancing investment climate is such a broad topic, which is clearly important. We rank in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, we rank number 55th among 189 countries. That's general ranking. But when it comes to starting a business, we rank 94th place. Awful place to be. 94th place. Why? Because it takes almost 8 days, God knows how many procedures, and almost 17% of per capita GDP cost to set up a business. Well, in the midst of all that upheaval, we pushed through, that package that cleared the parliament could actually put Turkey easily in the top 20. My colleagues are telling me that we could be the number 14, but anyway, I'm saying top 20. Why? Because we've reduced the number of procedures to about 3, a number of days to 2.5 days, and dramatically reduced the cost to start a business. Because starting a business, entrepreneurs are key to a lasting prosperity. So we've done that reform. I can go on and on. I don't want to bog you down into details, but what I'm trying to say is that we actually, in the midst of all this, we pushed an important reform to enhance investment climate. We all compete for FDI, and numbers were given. FDI, hasn't been as strong as it used to be. Emerging markets are not as popular as they used to be. We used to be in fashion. Of course, there was a lot of interest in emerging markets. But I think there is still, I agree with, previous speaker, that clearly there is still plenty of money out there. Plenty of capital out there. Plenty of, and I think if you put your house in order, if you do reforms, you can decouple, you can attract more FDI. And that's where we intend to go. So our biggest problem in this country is that we have low savings. If you look at medium-high emerging markets in terms of per capita GDP, countries with sort of medium-high, you would see that savings rate is about 30-31% on average. In Turkey, it's about 14-15%, half of that. And that makes us reliant on foreign savings and therefore on global risk appetite, which makes you vulnerable. This is an area where we are addressing as well. And again, in the midst of all this, political noise, we pushed a major reform through the parliament that is going to now have, we had private pension scheme. It was purely voluntary. Now we have something called auto-enrollment private pension scheme. And that's hopefully going to help boost savings and therefore, help Turkey reduce current account deficit to a more manageable level. But the work is not finished. We have a fairly comprehensive reform program. We have a bottom-up approach in terms of sectoral transformation. but we also have top-down approach. Education. In terms of access to education, we've done phenomenally well. We're spending a quarter of our tax revenues on education. But quality requires additional effort. So we need to enhance quality of education. That's another key reform area. Here we're talking about increasing share of private sector in education, having performance measurement of schools or teachers, getting teachers to be retrained, teaching Turkish students foreign language, something that we've been lagging. So essentially, we have all it takes, and it's already well underway. Judicial reform, delivery of justice in time, quick. It's a very important part of investment climate. And that's exactly what, again, we've made some progress. Further progress will be needed. Part of the, of course, efforts to attract FDI, but also to be prepared for the new industrial revolution that is underway, is to have a brand new patent law, IPR, protection, clearly at par with global best practices. Again, a bill is at the parliament. I can go on and on. Additional labor market reforms, public finance reform, even though last year we had a balanced budget, debt to GDP ratio is about 33% on a gross basis. But still, we need to improve quality of revenues. We need to prioritize, do an expenditure reform and reorient. So there's a lot to be done. But what is encouraging, and that was my third message, so my first message was Turkish democracy will be stronger and we will strengthen rule of law. The second message is we continue to believe in openness and strong dialogue with our partners and European integration in general. My third message, as I said, the environment today in Turkey is more conducive of reforms. I know that's not how it come across, but that's exactly our thinking. And if you look at our actions post-coup attempt, you would actually verify that that's the case. Now, there may be a lot of preoccupation with post-coup crackdown, but it is completely done within rule of law. It is based on evidence. I don't want to go into details, but we know that Turkey is subject to European Court of Human Rights, obviously jurisdiction and rulings. And that's why whatever we do has to be up to global standards. No country would allow a state within state or a rogue state or, a religious cult to grab the power from people, to grab the power from a democratically elected, a legitimate government. And so that's exactly what is happening. Whatever is happening should be taken within that context, and we will, make sure that that's the case. Now, nowadays, of course, as I said, globally, there is plenty of uncertainty, and that leads to a lot of volatility, excess volatility in financial markets, and that makes all the investment promotion agencies' job difficult. But I think the message from you to investment community should be, come on, don't focus on day-to-day or short-term volatility. Look at long-term fundamentals. Look at demographics. Look at reform process. Look at countries that are building better quality institutions. So I think if you can get that focus away from very short-term excess volatility, which is difficult to obviously manage but I think if you look beyond that, then the case for emerging markets is still there. The case for investments is still there. And countries that continues to put their house in order, countries that continue to reform so that they can boost productivity, and increase employment and create obviously higher income, clearly are the type of countries that ultimately should be the destination. Turkey is lucky here. We have a working age population growth rising at 1.7% per year. We have labor participation rate rising by about 2% per year. It's quite a challenge, but at the same time, it gives us a huge demographic window. Regardless of the politics of enlargement, regardless of the occasional noise, we remain on the path of EU accession process. It doesn't matter how long it takes, we will do what it takes to qualify for EU membership. Whether or not we become is a matter for Turkish people and European people to decide. But in terms of convergence in real terms, convergence in institutional, legislative terms will continue to run its course. We're committed to that. And I think that means better quality institutions, better rule of law, and enhanced standards of democracy, which is again key ingredient. And that's why I'm optimistic. And finally, on productivity. Yes, productivity is weak globally, and Turkey is no exception. The best way to boost productivity, of course, is to get private sector investments, to get the right type of public sector investments. That's key. But equally important is to eliminate barriers to competition, to open up. Do you know why productivity is weak? Well, there are many issues and even measurement issues. But one area, maybe much of growth or employment increase has been in services. Services is not typical tradable, area, sector. So clearly, the more openness, the better prospects of productivity. So more competition, product regulation, markets. So we need to go after those. And again, while it looks difficult sometimes, in my view, even those areas, if explained well, are low-hanging fruits. My final sort of message to my policymaker friends, but of course, since you are investment promotion people, clearly this message applies to all of us, is that we should never be prisoners of populist rhetoric. Or we can affect public opinion. And I think this is very important. So going forward, in particular in our neighborhood, but globally, we can say the right things and get people to focus on the right things, and therefore avoid falling into the populism trap, protectionist trap, because that actually is competition to the bottom. Essentially, if we all do that, competitive devaluations, protectionism, all of this actually means that global growth is going to get even worse, and that global prosperity won't rise. So the message is we can make a difference. And I think here leadership is required. And unfortunately, we have lots of elections in Europe and elsewhere. I think it's important that we have this strong message and as I said, not fall into that trap. Once again, we're delighted to have you here in Turkey. I think this is my second sort of meeting with you guys. Clearly, we're very happy, we're delighted. I do hope that the program is not very intense, that you can venture out. It's still decent weather this time of the year. And I know some of you may have concerns about safety and security, but no place is 100% safe, of course, but clearly Istanbul, you can feel safe, and I do hope that you have the courage to go out and discover this beautiful city. There's a lot of traffic-wise maybe chaos, but there's also, this is an amazing place. So I do encourage you to do a bit of sightseeing and to discover this beautiful city. I wish you a very productive summit, and I do hope to catch up at some other, I don't know, who knows, place or platform again with you. Thank you very much again for being here. Thank you very much for believing in Turkish story.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister Mehmet Simsek, for these words, and I can assure you the people have already been to Istanbul yesterday on a fantastic Bosphorus cruise, so they have seen a little bit of that fantastic town, I can agree as well. You see there's something going on, a table is coming. I think there's hardly been a speech this morning where the words collaboration and cooperation hasn't been spoken out. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to cooperate, we're going to do something about international collaboration. WAIPA is doing that with a memorandum of understandings with different organizations, and I would gladly ask the CEO of WAIPA, Boscan Skalar, here on stage. I don't know, Boscan, do you want to say a couple of words about the... Very good. So all the details from the CEO, please.
His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister Simsek, I'm really honored to have you here today. I'm glad that I see that many people in the audience expecting some great deliberations later, but let's focus now on the MOU signatures. As it was said many times, we at WAIPA strongly believe into cooperation instead of competition. So these MOUs that we will sign now with 4 different organizations will shape the path that we are following in the future, and we sincerely believe that this will be the good base, and this is just a start. There will be many more MOUs, and WAIPA is committed to sustainability and to inclusiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Boscan. I'll let you take your seat, and we're very honored, of course, and to have the privilege of having once again Arda Ermut and of course His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister afterwards on stage, that you could join us for that historic moment, so to speak, for the signatures of the Memorandum of Understanding. Thank you very much. And of course, we have photographers to take a picture of any of these signings. Thank you very much. And I would suggest that we start right away with the first one. Gentleman you've seen before on stage, Mr. Usama Kaisi from the Islamic Development Bank. So let's dive right into the first signature, please. Let me check, the pens are there, so everything is ready. Excellent. So congratulations. That will be the memorandum between WAIPA and the Islamic Development Bank. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Kasi, maybe I can ask you to stay or to stay a little bit on the stage, so afterwards we can do a group photo of all the people who are doing signatures. Second on the stage, please, Mrs. Gita Roland. She's from the International Labour Organization. Welcome here on stage as well. That's memorandum number 2. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Mrs. Rollins, maybe I can ask you here as well for the group picture afterwards. I hope Bosjan doesn't have a sore wrist yet, but he's ready for number 3. We have the memorandum with the annual investment meeting. Please, Mr. Dawood Al-Shasawi on stage. There you go.
Foto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Shazawi. Thank you very much. And we'll go straight to number 4. Please, Mr. Chris Knight. He's Global Commercial Director of FDI Intelligence. Welcome here on stage as well. Congratulations to number 4 as well. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. And before we go to the group picture of all the memorandum signatures here, we would once again like to thank very much His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister Simsek for coming here in his very hectic schedule, and we'll leave you to it. Thank you very much. And one final picture, please.